Hey everyone, welcome to Walden Pod. I'm Emerson Green. So I wanted to explain why I'm not a physicalist. There's obviously a lot we could talk about. There are a few ideas that, taken together, have led me away from physicalism. These points could factor into an argument against physicalism, namely that ordinary physicalism doesn't provide us with tools adequate to explain what we know about our world. The first and most important of these ideas that have led me away is an unshakable realism about phenomenal consciousness. By phenomenal consciousness, I mean experience, being such that there's something that it is like to be. If it's like something to be, phenomenal consciousness is present. Realism about experience is, as Galen Strawson puts it, the obligatory starting point for any remotely realistic, indeed any non-self-defeating, theory of what there is. By physicalism, I mean reductive physicalism. The sort of physicalist or materialist I'm concerned with affirms the existence of phenomenal consciousness, which they believe has emerged from entirely non-experiential concrete reality. There are more liberal versions of physicalism on offer, like Strawson's physicalism, but today I'm only concerned with physicalism in the ordinary sense. A key part of what I'm calling ordinary physicalism is that the intrinsic nature of matter is non-experiential. Some physicalists might object to that characterization because they don't like the language of intrinsic natures. Maybe they think matter has no intrinsic nature. It's just all behavior and structure. That's fine, and it happens to make the case against physicalism even easier. As a brief aside, it should be mentioned that a rejection of physicalism does not entail that one rejects anything about physics or physical science. Many forms of non-physicalism, certainly my form, are not in any way in conflict with physical science, naturalism, or atheism. I think realism about phenomenal consciousness entails precision. Phenomenal precision is the notion that experience is not vague. It is completely and utterly precise whether experience is present. For this reason, phenomenal consciousness doesn't admit of borderline cases. Put simply, it is either like something to be, or it is not. And to see the truth of this, we need only consider the alternative and try to imagine a borderline case of experience. Can it kind of be like something? No, because then it would be like something. Can it merely seem to be like something? No, for the same reason. Can it just barely be like something? No again. It's either like something to be, or it's not. There's actually no middle ground to be had between these two states. In this sense, experience is not vague. Third, nonemergence. Here I need to distinguish between weak emergence and strong emergence. Weak emergence is the kind of emergence that's ubiquitous in the natural sciences. Atoms emerge from subatomic particles, molecules emerge from atoms, organisms emerge from molecules, societies emerge from organisms. At no point is there a truly emergent phenomenon. There are no new concreta that have been added to the ontological inventory of reality. The weak sort of emergence is to be distinguished from strong emergence, which historically has simply been called emergence. David Chalmers is a prominent contemporary emergentist whose naturalistic dualism makes use of strong emergence. He thinks that if consciousness emerged, it must have been an instance of strong emergence. To accept that experience emerged strongly is to be a dualist in some sense. Strongly emergent phenomena are not identical to, reducible to, or deducible from other phenomena. But on physicalism, there are no giant leaps in nature that could be characterized as strong emergence. You can't simultaneously hold reductive physicalism and the view that the emergence of experience was a case of strong emergence. To claim that a phenomenon can be reduced, or to say that it's identical to or constituted by more fundamental parts, is to say that it emerged weakly. Physicalists think experience emerges weakly, in the same sense that biology and tables and whirlpools emerge. Biology emerges out of chemistry. Liquidity emerges from molecules, which are not liquid. Tables emerge from matter, which is not tables. So we have no trouble getting A from not A in all sorts of cases. Why should experience be any different? That was my position for a long time. We've got no trouble with emergence in all these other cases. Why should it be a problem with consciousness? For all the other examples of weak emergence, we have the same category of concepts on either side of the emergent divide. We go from objective description to objective description. But with consciousness, we go from objective description to subjective description. How many objective descriptions does it take to add up to a subjective description? How can we describe behavior in such a way that leads to experience? In other words, how do we go from a third-person description to a first-person description? At the very least, there's an epistemic problem here. But why should we think this objective-subjective gap is also an ontological gap? Well, it seems impossible, in principle, to give an intelligible account of how we go from one to the other. If subjective reality emerged from non-subjectivity, we should be able to give an intelligible account of how that happened. We can give a perfectly intelligible account of how we get from chemistry to biology, from non-tables to tables, from non-liquid molecules to liquidity. But how do we bridge the objective and subjective? How can we start with third-person objective description and just eventually get to first-person subjective description? Physicalists need to do more than simply appeal to unrelated examples of successful reduction in cases of weak emergence. Look, you don't have to give me the details. Just the broad strokes would be fine. All I want is an intelligible explanation of how we get from non-experiential reality to experiential reality, just like we have an intelligible explanation of the examples commonly mentioned. In those cases, we have a smooth gradient of gradual change. But how could this be true of the emergence of experience given phenomenal precision? The emergence of liquidity, or biology, can be described in purely structural, behavioral, third-personal terms. We go from one type of objective description to another type. We never cross the divide between objective and subjective, and there's never a giant leap. Here's Thomas Nagel highlighting the difference between objective and subjective. Quote, "Human physiologists may take a special interest in physical brain events, but they can, in principle, be understood just as well, or even better, by creatures totally unlike us in physical and mental structure. To understand them, such creatures need not take up our point of view. Physical brain processes can be understood objectively from the outside, because they are not subjective phenomena. And no description or analysis of the objective nervous system, however complete, will ever by itself imply anything which is not objective." End quote. Experience is unobservable objectively. If it wasn't for the fact that we ourselves are conscious, there would be no evidence that consciousness exists. No objective description, on its own, will ever imply the existence of anything that is not objective. We can describe everything about the human brain and its emergence objectively. But that third-person description will exclude the first-person point of view, without which it wouldn't be a conscious experience. How could we bridge this divide without strong emergence? Another distinguishing factor in the case of experience, in addition to the unique objective-subjective divide, is the ontological status of experience versus that of a chair or a whirlpool. Whirlpool is a useful way of talking about some concrete reality X. Similarly, chair is a convenient concept. It's a helpful way of talking about some concrete reality Y. But there's more ontological weight to experience than there is to a chair. A chair is a concept that refers to some concrete reality. Experience, on the other hand, is the concrete reality. It's not just a convenient way of talking about some unknown thing in itself to which we have no direct access. Let's return for a moment to realism. I take experience to be the most certainly known, real, natural, physical, concrete phenomenon. Natural and physical deserve their own discussion, but for now I want to focus on concrete. Concrete here means not abstract. And by abstract, I'm not diverging from the usual philosophical sense of abstract. in which some philosophers hold that abstract objects, like numbers or concepts, exist and can safely be considered real. I think experiential goings-on are plainly concrete and not abstract. It seems absurd to take my direct experience that I'm having right now and claim that it's merely an abstract concept. But it's worth taking a moment to address this increasingly well-worn physicalist escape route. So allow me to concede that phenomenal consciousness is a concept. Many physicalists go to great lengths to establish this. I'm happy to grant their point. What I'm unwilling to grant is that experience is just a concept. It clearly enjoys concrete existence. Our concept refers to something that is directly, immediately known by every conscious creature. We have direct acquaintance with the thing we're talking about. The reason for tiresomely holding that one's direct experience is merely an abstraction, rather than a concrete natural phenomenon, is that it allows physicalists to pretend to be realists by way of diminishing the ontological weight of experience. If one doesn't want to bite the absurd anti-realist bullet, they can hold that one's immediate experience is merely a concept. So they can claim to be a realist about phenomenal consciousness while surreptitiously denying realism. I'm not a fake realist about experience. I'm a real realist, which means I accept experience as the most certainly known, concretely existing natural phenomenon. To insist otherwise would mean that phenomenal consciousness is real in only a very limited sense. The bottom line is that your direct experience that you're having right now is not just a convenient way of talking about the world. It's real. It's really, really real. Real in a deeper sense than most things we're realists about. So let's imagine the emergence of experience. There is only unfeeling, non-experiential physical stuff at the most fundamental levels of our universe. It's not like anything for an electron. There's no feeling or sensation, no qualitative experience at all, of any kind. Now follow the plot of emergence that we've pieced together from the most fundamental levels to the most highly emergent levels. If we're starting with, say, subatomic particles, they combine to make atoms, which combine to make molecules, which combine to make cells, and organisms, and so on up the scale. From physics to chemistry, up to microbiology, all the way up to brains, in sociology and macro-scale reality. Nothing new is being added at any point in this upward journey. Every level is reducible to the level beneath it. Chemistry is just another way of talking about physics when you zoom out a bit. We have a smooth gradient of gradual change all the way up to our brains. But at some point, it becomes like something for this matter, from inside. We go from the fundamental levels, which are made up of non-conscious, physical material that has no subjective experience, and at some point, we get conscious physical material that has a first-person subjective experience, which I'll say again, is really, really real. When we go from subatomic particles to atoms, we're using a new way of talking about the same stuff that's always been there. But if we take experience to be real, we cannot say the same of its emergence. It's not the same stuff that's always been there. There's been a non-redundant addition to the inventory of reality. To quote William James, "The demand for continuity has, over large tracts of science, proved itself to possess true prophetic power. We ought therefore ourselves sincerely to try every possible mode of conceiving the dawn of consciousness, so that it may not appear equivalent to the eruption into the universe of a new nature, non-existent until then. Merely to call consciousness nascent will not serve our turn. It's true that the word signifies not yet quite born, and so seems to form a sort of bridge between existence and non-entity. But that is a verbal quibble. The fact is that discontinuity comes in if a new nature comes in at all. The quantity of the latter is quite immaterial. The girl in Midshipman Easy could not excuse the illegitimacy of her child by saying it was a very small one. And consciousness, however small, is an illegitimate birth in any philosophy that starts without it, yet professes to explain all facts by continuous evolution. If evolution is to work smoothly, consciousness in some shape must have been present at the very origin of things. Accordingly, we find that the more clear-sighted evolutionary philosophers are beginning to posit it there." End quote. Phenomenal precision is one reason experience is different from tables and chairs, biology and beards, piles of sand, and when the day becomes the night. It's vague when sand becomes a pile of sand. There is no precise moment when the day becomes the night. There is no single hair that turns stubble into beardness. There's no particulate change in the construction of a chair when we cross the chair, not a chair dividing line. There are borderline cases. I could continually deform a chair, and when it ceases to be a chair is vague. Any point you pick is going to feel arbitrary. But as we've seen, it is either like something to be, or it is not. There is no smooth gradient of gradual change that ordinarily marks weak emergence at this level. I couldn't start with consciousness and continually deform it until it wasn't really clear whether something was conscious or not. And as a brief aside, this is one reason that functionalism is probably not true, since functions are essentially vague, and experience is not. But that's a topic for another day. Physicalists think experience emerged somewhere in the realm of complex organisms. The precision of the emergence of experience at this organismal level is highly anomalous. We're not talking about an ordinary case of emergence here. I don't think phenomenal precision shows that experience is irreducible, but I think it's a hint that it is. If experience is irreducible, then its emergence, if it emerged, would have the precise character I've been describing. So for physicalists, phenomenal precision is an anomaly. The transition from objective to subjective is another anomaly. The lack of an intelligible story is an anomaly. The only way to wriggle out of this and continue to affirm the weak emergence of experience is to alter our concept of experience, effectively redefining it to mean something other than experience. It must be an illusion or a mere concept, a convenient way of talking about the same stuff that's always been there. But this is just semantically obscure eliminativism. To affirm any one of these options is to abandon realism about experience. But phenomenal consciousness possesses more ontological weight than chairs or biology or liquidity. Those are just different vocabularies. Experience, on the other hand, is not a different way of talking about the same stuff that's always been there. We've added to the ontological inventory of reality in a way totally disanalogous to biochemistry. Furthermore, this new concrete reality of experience must have emerged at a precise moment, since it's not vague whether or not experience is present. This is not weak emergence. Weak emergence is not characterized by a sudden leap. So just to switch gears for a second here, this strange fact about experience, that it's not vague, leads us to a Soriades-style argument against the emergence of consciousness. I'm quoting from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, quote, "Very roughly, if consciousness does not admit of borderline cases, then we will have to suppose that some utterly precise micro-level change, down to an exact arrangement of particles, marked the first appearance of consciousness, or the change from non-conscious to conscious embryo/fetus. And it is going to seem arbitrary that it was that utterly precise change that was responsible for this significant change in nature." End quote. If consciousness emerged, arranging subatomic particles into nerve cells abruptly generates experience at an exact point. The lights are completely off when those same particles are arranged in a slightly different way, but arrange them as nerve cells and it'll feel like something for that matter to be. So will one nerve cell do it? What about two nerve cells? If your answer is 357,005 neurons, why wasn't it 357,004? What's so special about nerve cells anyway? They're not made of unique material. They're composed of the same protons, neutrons, and electrons as anything else. So it must be the arrangement, right? And of course I agree that altering the configuration of matter will alter the contents of experience, but I can't agree that altering the configuration of matter will alchemize non-experiential stuff into experiential stuff. The arbitrariness objection is certainly an interesting one that I'd like to see physicalists contend with. However, I think the more serious consequence of phenomenal precision is the charge of strong emergence. This is for two reasons. First, I find strong emergence to be deeply implausible. To quote Galen Strawson, "I don't think you could arrange mere non-conscious physical stuff in such a way that experience would spring into existence. That would be what we call radical emergence. It would be like getting concrete things out of abstract things." End quote. Second, one who endorses emergence of this kind is no longer a physicalist. You're a dualist. If experience could not have emerged weakly due to phenomenal precision, in other words, because no smooth gradient of gradual change is possible, and because our experiences are not merely concepts but concretely real, we have strong emergence. And if we have strong emergence, we no longer have physicalism. So here's the problem for physicalism. Once we grant that experience is real and irreducible, we can know that physicalism is false. And once we accept we need strong emergence to get experience, we've admitted that experience is irreducible. Saying that a phenomenon emerged weakly is another way of saying it's reducible. Weak emergence is in the business of offering reductive explanation. If we think strong emergence is required, the phenomenon in question is irreducible. Again, once we concede that experience is real and irreducible, it's over for physicalism. If you're a reductionist, you've already committed yourself to the idea that it's the same stuff that's always been there. But if there was this transition from it not being like anything to it being like something, that would mean you're wrong. Unless it's not really like something. It's not like anything at the fundamental levels. It's not really like anything up here. You could say that it's just a concept, or just a different way of talking about collections of matter. On this view, speaking in the language of molecules, for example, is just a way of talking about collections of physical matter arranged molecule-wise. The atom isn't some kind of ontologically separate thing from its component parts, from the protons and neutrons and electrons that constitute it. Atoms are entirely reducible to their component parts, and crucially, we have an intelligible story of how you get from one to the other, where we can clearly see that it's the same stuff that's always been there. Consciousness, however, is not just another way of talking about. It really looks as though something novel has emerged. If experience emerged, we have an appearance of an entirely new, concretely real, natural phenomenon. Finally, we have monism. Neutral monists, idealists, and panpsychists all endorse monism. Panpsychists can even endorse a more specific version of monism, as Thomas Nagel explains in his essay Panpsychism. Rather than taking monism as a premise in his argument, he takes material composition as a premise. Quote, "Any living organism, including a human being, is a complex material system. It consists of a huge number of particles combined in a special way. Each of us is composed of matter that had a largely inanimate history before finding its way onto our plates or those of our parents. It was probably once part of the sun, but matter from another galaxy would do as well. If it were brought to Earth, and grass were grown in it, and milk from a cow that ate the grass were drunk by a pregnant woman, then her child's brain would be partly composed of that matter. Anything whatever, if broken down far enough and rearranged, could be incorporated into a living system. No constituents besides matter are needed." End quote. Nagel's material composition premise could work just as well as monism for our purposes here, and Strawson, along with other Russellians, has gone to great lengths explaining how material composition is compatible with panpsychism, and even how physicalism, properly understood, is compatible with panpsychism. But like I said, we're talking about ordinary physicalism today. Each one of these ideas we've discussed is more plausible than its denial. Realism, phenomenal precision, nonemergence, monism, the seeming impossibility of bridging the objective and subjective, the fact that we don't have an intelligible story of emergence, and should have one. And these ideas taken together arguably lead to panpsychism. Physicalism, which posits the weak emergence of experience, is in conflict with realism. I think in order to accept weak emergence with regards to experience, you might have to deny phenomenal precision. Up here in the biological macro world, emergence is vague. That the emergence of experience is precise is a signal that this is not business as usual. This is not how weak emergence is supposed to work. The physicalist also runs into the problem that a new, concrete natural phenomenon has appeared, which is entirely disanalogous from every other case of weak emergence. It's also entirely disanalogous because we've crossed the objective-subjective divide, and because we have no intelligible account of how to get from one to the other. If one wants to remain committed to the idea that consciousness emerged, one must commit to strong emergence, and to accept strong emergence is to reject physicalism. Physicalism seems to be unable to explain phenomenal consciousness, since it would require us to redefine consciousness in a way tantamount to its denial. Non-reductive physicalists are a little better off, since they don't deny the most certainly known natural phenomenon, but their non-reductive position amounts to dualism of one kind or another. Actually, when I think about non-reductive physicalism, I think of that scene from The Office, where Michael Scott says, "I would not steal the bread, and my family would not starve." Like, you can't have both. You have to pick one or the other. Non-reductionism or physicalism. Up until this point, I've only obliquely referenced the irreducibility of consciousness. I didn't explicitly add a non-reductionism premise because I was trying to get you to feel the intuition without simply saying that experience cannot be reduced to parts that are not themselves experiential. That's what we're trying to find out. So I talked about phenomenal precision, the subjective-objective divide, and the anomalous lack of an intelligible story of emergence. So the argument against physicalism only needs a realism premise and a non-reductionism premise. Some physicalists accept non-reductionism, but reject realism. Others accept realism, but reject non-reductionism. That's the more common route. I think once you flesh out a reducible form of experience, your position amounts to a rejection of realism. I think physicalism leads naturally to illusionism about consciousness, and many physicalists agree. That's why I'm not a physicalist. So the argument for panpsychism needs realism and non-reductionism as premises, but it also needs nonemergence and monism to block the way to dualism. But again, once we accept realism and non-reductionism, it's over for physicalism. We can know physicalism is false. But if you want to get to panpsychism, you have to add the nonemergence and monism premises. So we've been touching on this throughout, but I want to make my reasoning more explicit. So here's one more argument why I'm not a physicalist. The key premise in this argument is weak emergence is essentially vague. If I can prove that, then I think I can show physicalism is false. I can easily defend the premise weak emergence is usually vague, or weak emergence is vague up in this kind of macro biological world that we live in. But once we accept that premise, that weak emergence is essentially vague, in order to reject physicalism, all we have to do is accept realism and phenomenal precision. To say that something emerged weakly is to say that it's reducible. Weak emergence is in the business of giving reductive explanations. If a phenomenon is strongly emergent, that means it's irreducible. Phenomenal precision, I think, gives us a hint that experience would have to be strongly emergent. But if we accept that weak emergence is essentially vague, then it follows that physicalism doesn't work. A phenomenon that is the product of strong emergence is not reducible to or deducible from underlying phenomena. A phenomenon that is the product of weak emergence is reducible to or deducible from underlying phenomena. And if we can show that weak emergence is always vague and establish phenomenal precision, then that means the emergence of experience must have been a case of strong emergence. If this is true, reductive physicalism is false. So physicalists must reject realism, precision, or the vagueness of weak emergence in order to escape. So nothing is non-controversial in philosophy, but I think realism is a safe premise. I think phenomenal precision is a safe premise. It's just showing that weak emergence is essentially vague, that it's vague in every case. That's the thing that's harder to show. I think it's easy to show that weak emergence is usually vague, especially in the realm where we live, where consciousness is supposed by physicalists to have emerged. That's in the realm of biology and tables and chairs, liquidity, niftiness, and so on. So if I had to lay it out, those are the three premises: realism, phenomenal precision, and the vagueness of weak emergence. On Twitter, Theoretical Bullshit, Scott Clifton, was asked why he is not a physicalist, and I appreciated his succinct answer. Because consciousness is a thing. Thank you for listening. I've been Emerson Green, and I'll talk to you next time.